Audits, and I got the right guest for you. We have Paul Koks. Now, you might know him as the analytics advocate at his blog onlinemetrics.com, and he writes really in depth about Google Analytics, our favorite web analytics tool, goes really in depth on some stuff, really long posts. And I find myself oftentimes going back to his blog, finding out like which custom dimensions should I use, or how can I interpret this or that kind of report inside of Google Analytics. He really has some good stuff there. He also writes for other blogs like Supermetrics or the Online Behavior blog, but he doesn't only write, he's also a creator of a free Google Analytics audit tool, which you can find out more about on his website. And he is the creator and teaches this kind of stuff in his course, the Setup Google Analytics Mastery course, which you can also see on his website. And he's not only talking about this stuff or writes about this stuff, he's also a practitioner, of course, helps other businesses out as a consultant. So without further ado, we got lots to cover in this session. So welcome to MeasureSummit, Paul Koks.
Thanks, Julian. Great to be here. And once again, thank you for having me. And I'm looking forward to talk with you all about Google Analytics, audits, and everything that comes up today. So I'm very excited, and I hope everyone who is listening will learn a lot today.
Great. We are actually going to do a little bit of an interview style session here, so a little bit apart from the presentation that we might have heard already. So we're going to just start out and go through the topic of today's session, which is Google Analytics audits. We're going to talk a little bit about your process, but then also about the future of it. And I'm really excited to get started on this. But before we dive into today's topic, maybe let the viewers out there know about how you actually got into Google Analytics and analytics as a whole, and got so into it that you are now an expert on it, really.
Yeah. So great question. So I think ever since I was young, as a kid, I always liked to work with numbers and data and solving problems all around data and numbers, as I mentioned. So once I was roughly 20 years ago, I started studying at the university. At that time, we didn't have any online marketing education or analytics yet, but I started with economics and marketing. So very close to what I always liked as a kid. And also at that time, eBay came up roughly in 2000, it became bigger and bigger. And there was one great thing, my brother, he was playing a card game like Magic the Gathering. And in that card game, you could buy, for example, the cards in the Netherlands, but also in the United States. And since I like to play with numbers and data, I found out at the time, the currency was very good for us, in terms of if you buy a card in the US, you can easily sell it in the Netherlands, with a high margin, because the euro was very strong at that time. So I was already thinking with numbers and data, how can I take advantages? How can I make something out of it, both in terms of learning something as well as earning something. So I bought his cards, sold them in the Netherlands. I bought them as well for my brother at that time. And also some other thing came up very early, when I started out in this field. First, I worked at several agencies. I started as an online marketer, very close to what I studied, but in the online marketing field instead of offline, what I actually learned, at an agency. And at the same time, I started writing online. Not yet about analytics, but one of my passions, marathon running, especially something I did a lot in the past, I thought I can build out a website about marathon training and see how many people I can reach all over the world. So I bought a domain, marathontrainingtips.com, and I actually started writing content, and I hired some writers also to add content on that website. And I think after 1 year or something, I ranked number 5 on the word marathon training in the world. So that was pretty high. And I started to think about what can I do with this traffic? Because of course it's nice to have visitors, but I have to do something on the website. So I started selling other training programs, in terms of affiliate marketing through the website. So at that time, I also, of course, needed data to see where are my visitors coming from, what can I learn from them in terms of what do I need to optimize on the website, where did they land, how did they go. So I started learning about analytics actually by building my own website, gathering data, analyzing which visitors converted, which didn't, So that was when I first started using Google Analytics on my own website, roughly 2009, 2010. And at the same time, as I mentioned, I was working at agencies, first as an online marketer, but soon I found out that especially the thing that triggered me the most was using data to make better decisions, using data to help companies, to help other companies grow and to help my own websites grow. So most logically, I took the decision to work as an analytics consultant. So I worked at another company. It was a search engine agency at that time. And I started working really on analytics, like helping clients with implementations. It was really learning by doing because I needed to have like experience to grow myself further in the field. There was not a lot of education already. I took one of the courses at UBC, University of British Columbia, of Stephane Hamel, someone very known in the field. And that helped me also a lot to learn a lot from someone who had experience already. And then in 2012, I actually started Online Metrics. I am someone who really likes to share what he learns. So first, I shared about marathon running. That was more like a hobby and a passion. And then when I started to learn more about analytics, I felt a great desire to write and to share what I actually learned. And by teaching, you learn yourself. This is something you will come up to if you do that teaching others is the best way to learn. So I decided to pack all my knowledge, start writing blog posts at the beginning. It were blog posts with like, let's say, paragraphs of 10 lines long. And later on, I started to be more structured and getting better at it because it's something you need to learn as well, to write and to expose your knowledge. So I did that for roughly 4 years, and I worked continuously also at agencies until 2016. And then after, let's say, working 10 years at different agencies, I felt like the one thing that is always something that we need to work on when I was at an agency is the setup of Google Analytics or the setup of Adobe Analytics. Because almost all companies, let's say 90% of the companies, they make a lot of mistakes in the setup, which really influences eventually the data quality and the decisions that you can make based on this data. So I thought, why should I always do this for agencies instead of maybe taking the leap and trying something by myself, get more freedom on what I do, take my own vision and process while offering this to other companies. So in 2016, I already had like an audience on Online Metrics. Online Metrics was a blog until that time. And I decided, let's take the leap and try to make a business out of it. So there comes the audit in. And that is where I really started in analytics for myself instead of working for other companies. So long story short, data has always been my passion and something like going through my life in various ways. And roughly like 4.5 years ago, I started this business for myself, like in the analytics field, and the audit was the starting point.
Okay, cool. That's fascinating to hear. I think that when we think about analytics, we always think about the analysis stage. So how did you get to the space where you said, okay, it's really about the setup of things or the data quality? How was the realization that this is something you want to focus on?
Well, while working for a lot of companies during my agency time, I saw, like, as you mentioned, like everybody is busy with the analysis, but the data was either not there or the data was not right. So I could also say they measure the wrong things or they measure things wrong. So there's a little bit like two different ways of saying it, or two additional things to think about it. So that was what I always saw, like when people are doing an analysis, they don't have all the data. Data will never be perfect, but the data was simply not good. So when seeing that, I thought we have to take one step back and we really need to invest more time in the setup process to ensure that the data has a certain quality before we are making decisions. And all companies that we worked for, they also at that time saw like the benefits of, let's say, revealing the mistakes in their implementation to take the data quality to a higher level and to be able to make better decisions, whether, for example, at the channel level or how channels interact with each other. They really found out like the value of this audit at that time. And I always felt like, especially 2010, 2015, that most companies started with the analysis before implementing analytics in a really good way. So this is where it's really like by practical realization with working with clients.
Right. So when I would be a business, well, I also run a business, but let's say we are an e-commerce store or somebody in a lead generation website, for example, why would it actually be important to audit my Google Analytics implementation?
Because if you wouldn't audit the implementation, the quality of your data wouldn't be good. So it means that you either don't measure the things on your website that you really need to measure to take the best business decisions to get the most, let's say, ROI out of your channels that are driving traffic to the website. And also, like, sometimes you don't measure it, but also very often you don't measure, for example, complete things. So to give you an example, if you run an e-commerce store, there might be like a page where a product is shown and you can add the product to cart. What you often see is that companies measure, for example, the product add to cart, but they don't measure which product is actually added to cart. So you have a little bit like a sidestep, like in analytics, you have, for example, e-commerce as an event category, you have add to cart as an event action, an event label you can use to store additional information and to learn more. Very often this field is left blank, so it's not set, and they don't add the product name or the product SKU. So you don't have all the information that you need to take the best business decision. So in other words, you as a business owner, you driving a business, having a business, won't be able to take the best business decision going forward if your data quality is not optimal, or you would maybe take the wrong business decisions because you think that affiliate marketing is driving all sales, but it's measured incorrectly and it's actually another channel that drives the sales, for example. So you're investing in the wrong channel and you take the wrong steps forward.
Okay, interesting. So if I would be the business owner and now I'm saying, okay, data quality is important to me, what would be your process to get started with an audit? Where would you look into first? And yeah, maybe take us through how you do analytics audits.
Yeah. So you mentioned in the beginning that I have like this Google Analytics audit tool, the free tool connected to Google Sheets. It also works with Supermetrics. It's based on 25 checks. Each of the checks gives you 4 points if you pass the check, so you can get to 100. So what I do is usually companies approach me via the website. They share a bit about the website and the problems that they're currently facing. So that's where we start. Before setting up like an introductory call, I ask them whether it's okay to get a quick look in their GA account, because running the Google Analytics audit tool already reveals some of the points that we might need to work on if we are going to work together. So that's like a start before we have like an introductory call. That's the second step of the process. In this call, we discuss a lot of things like the website, the organization, like how the organization is structured, also the business objectives, because an audit is really specific based also on the objectives, requirements of the company that I work with. And also I like to know more about the development side. Usually either the company itself with an internal dev team, or they outsource us to an external person, like do the data layer implementations, for example. So I like to learn more about the structure, the business challenges, technical challenges, and everything that is going on the website. And this is like a complete package of input that I get through asking the right questions in an introductory call of 30, 60 minutes, sometimes even longer. I take this everything with me, and then I start with the actual audit. The audit usually takes roughly like 2 to 3 weeks. And in this audit, I go through the website, I go through a lot of different checks that are business specific. For example, an e-commerce website has often like enhanced e-commerce running. A lead gen website doesn't have it always running. Sometimes they implement it in a creative way to still make use of e-commerce. So I go to a lot of different settings related to analytics, and then I come up with like 2 things. Like one is let's say an aggregated Google Sheet where I list out all the checks, roughly 50 or 60. They are changing all the time based on new insights, based on new developments on Google side. And then I share like, okay, these items, these are the findings, okay or not okay. whether it has a high priority to solve it, what's my recommendation. That's the Google Sheet. Also, in addition, I wrote out a much more comprehensive document, both to list the findings and the recommendations, but also a lot of more background information around it, because I don't want to only like state the findings and what we need to improve, but also put in place a process for the company that I work with, for example, around campaign tracking. What's the actual benefit to set up campaign tracking in a very structured way, not just saying, okay, your medium should be defined otherwise, but also to give a company information to learn and to really educate the people that are working there, that are involved with marketing and analytics, so that they know more strategically how to structure campaign tracking and event tracking in the future. So this document is given to the client, and we discuss it as well, like in a call after the audit is completed with the right persons at the company, like what I found out, what we need to do from there. And then that's the audit part. But once the audit is finished, there's a lot more to do, because as you can imagine, like you have listed all the things that need to be improved, the priorities as well. And then we have still like the implementation part. So let's say in the process, in 9 out of 10 audits that I do, I follow it with the GA setup. You can think about setting up the right filters, setting up the default channel grouping in the right way, content grouping, everything on the configuration side of GA, I usually do. So on the company that I work with, I try to strategically support them with the GTM setup as well. Of course, I also will build out some data layers that they can use to implement enhanced e-commerce in the best way for their company, or other data layers. But the technical implementation on the website is done usually by the company itself, or by like an external agency that helps with the development. And the GTM setup, the end responsibility, as it goes much further than only Google Analytics or Facebook Analytics, and it usually involves like a lot of things, I try to leave at the company. So I'm more like strategically involved with the GTM setup, but the operational part and taking it away as the end responsibility is usually in the company that I work with. And once that everything is in place, of course, we do like a lot of testing. We need to test like before as well as after the GTM setup is ready and GA is ready, to ensure that everything is going properly. Then we still need to do a lot of things, because it's not a one-time thing. As you know, like businesses change, a lot of things change, like data points change. So we need to do this like on a more regular basis. So I usually advise to do it at least like 4 times a year, like for example, a mini audit on the most important points that are critical to check. Also, I use a lot of automation, as you'll find that if you look in the Google Analytics audit tool, to automate a lot of settings automatically, like during the year, to be able to find out like if something rings a bell that we need to be alert and to change things. So this is partly automatically and partly manually. And in addition to that, for quite a few companies, once the audit is in place, so for everyone who's listening, the audit is such a great starting point to convince the company about like why data quality is important, why they need to check it, because often so much goes wrong. And it really gives you a lot of buy-in for selling other services later on. When you're an agency, I just focus on analytics, but I can imagine people are listening who are doing much more than agency, or companies that really benefit from it. That after that, you can more easily take a next step in a different direction. So in my case, I usually support companies with monthly support, both on data quality, but also, for example, on the analysis side, recommendations based on the data that we gather. So this is in short the process, starting really off with a small check, introductory call, final call, the setup, and also testing and data quality is never something that is where you cannot pay any attention anymore. You need to be focused on that as well.
Oh, that's a very comprehensive and big process. The first question that comes to mind, like how long does this take for? I don't know. It probably depends on the company, right? How big they are, but what would you gather in terms of like from the first call to actually delivering the audit? How long does it usually take?
To delivering the audit is usually like 3 to 4 weeks. But if you look at the entire process, And what often happens is that they want to go fast. It's always like if you work with a client, they want to go fast, faster than often is like realistic. So I mentioned then, well, we can do it maybe the entire project in 6 to 7 weeks, for example, sometimes a bit more, sometimes a bit less. But you really need to have like your dev resource in place at the right time so they can take over the recommendation, implement things on the website. So what happens often is that it takes a few weeks longer because there is not enough capacity. They have a lot of other things going on, like they need to fix bugs and they don't have so much capacity to already start with implementing this stuff. So
right.
2 months like is quite normal, especially if the company is a lot larger. If it's a smaller company, an easier setup, maybe we can do it in 4 to 5 weeks in total, including the setup.
Okay, cool. Take us a little bit into you probably have a checklist and you have your steps. What are some common things that you see inside of the checklist that, that people can check right now, maybe even in their analytics implementation, if they have it implemented? What do you see as common mistakes that are made and, check for in your audit?
Yeah, let's start with one thing that is really important to be aware of, and that's personally identifiable information, PAI also known. You probably know it from like having pages where the email address is attached, sent to Google Analytics. That's an example of PAI. But you can also have it in site search or in your event labels, event action, even your custom dimensions. So one of the things I stumbled upon, it was for an American fashion company in the e-commerce niche, is that they had like the checkout step measured, so which is great from announced e-commerce. You can also fill in the checkout options with additional information, and they passed in the address in the checkout step 1. So the address information, they took like the postal code and also the city name. And actually in some countries you can lead this information into like one individual, so it's PAI. And they were getting such a lots of data of PAI. So PAI, I definitely recommend to check the pages, events, custom dimensions, etc. You can search on Google like what's actually included in PAI, but that is a big one, and I see it often coming through, like at least in 50% of the cases. Well, another one is that I think it was roughly 3 years ago, I did an audit for a real estate company in the Netherlands, really a big one. I think nowadays it has like 40 or 50 million page views per month. And what I noticed, like the default channel grouping is, as you might know, people are listening, connected to campaign tracking. So if you set up like source mediums, it need to be in line with either the default channel grouping as defined by Google, so the channels, for example, paid search, organic search, affiliate connects to medium as affiliate as an example. And if you don't have the connection right, then the traffic ends up in the other bucket within the channels, within the default channel grouping. So I always strive for having like the other bucket lower than 2%. In this specific case, company now having 40 million page views or visits, they had like campaigns running at that time, but the campaigns were very large, but defined with source and mediums that were not picked up by the default channel grouping setup. So what happened is that they had like 30 to 40% of other at the time of monitoring when I checked their account. So, and they actually created dashboards out of it in Data Studio, for example, where they had like the other channel like being listed there. So this is a big one. Campaign tracking, source and mediums, you need to be aware like that they both impact if you analyze at that level as well as connected to the default channel grouping, so the channels. Why do I mention the default channel grouping? Just one side note is that the default channel grouping is the only one that is connected to the reporting API at the moment. That's why I recommend to look into the default channel grouping when defining it, instead of the custom channel grouping if you want to build out like dashboards outside of GA via Google Sheets or a different tool, because you can use the API to automatically import the data in a different tool. Another one, if you look nowadays like SPAs, like single page applications, it's a little bit of an, let's say, current topic, because a lot of companies, especially e-commerce companies, I see this as well, like a lot when doing audits for e-commerce sites, is that the page, like not the entire page is being refreshed when someone navigates to another page. What usually happens is that page view tracking works like with a full reload of the page and that everything is refreshed, so then the next page view is measured. So if you look at your own website and you have like an SPA and you're running Universal Analytics, there might be a chance that you are actually not measuring the page views right. What can be an example is on an e-commerce site, you have, for example, a lot of different categories. And when someone navigates from one category to the other, then the second page view is not tracked anymore. So you will actually not measure page views right. This is like a basic measurement, but in SPAs, it can be much more challenging. I need to do like some technical things in GTM, probably based on the history listeners or something like that, and work with your developer to get that fixed. And one more thing, I worked for a lead gen site. Goals is another topic that is very important to check. A lot of companies either don't measure like the right goals, or they have like a lot of different goals, or they didn't have like goal values implemented on non-e-commerce sites. I once had a lead gen site with a lead gen form, and they had just one goal installed. It was quite a comprehensive site with a lot of content. The goal was like, of course, to submit the lead gen form. So I asked them, what is actually the value of this submitting of the lead generation form? Like, what is the value that your company gets economically out of it? And they were all like, so they didn't know. So they really didn't translate like this into like what it actually brought in for their business. So I work with them to eventually define also a goal value in the front end of like having this lead gen form submitted based on averages that they get out of all the deals. And then it gave some more like economical exposure in the company as well in terms of what the website was delivering, instead of only having like a numbers, like we had 7 lead gen forms submitted last week. They mentioned like we probably had roughly $30,000 in revenue. This is not like completely accurate, of course, but it gives like in the longer term a better representation of what the channels are driving in terms of economical value. And then the last thing, like I mentioned already about event tracking. Event tracking is something you should definitely check. A few things that you should check is, for example, the event categories. You shouldn't have like 100 or 300 event categories, but try to categorize it like in a way that you can actually analyze and work with the data. So keep your event categories a little bit low. Event action, event label, what I can say about the event label is that it's often not filled, and you can use like, you can fill it with a lot of useful information, like in addition to the main event that is tracked, for example, e-commerce, or if you do like scroll tracking or specific clicks or anything, please fill in the event label field. And don't always fill it in with page, because page is something that is already like at your disposal within event tracking as a normal dimension that you can use. So simply don't do always like the page part as the event label for all the events that you are tracking. So these are just a few things, and we could go on like for an hour or so. But we have limited time, so
right.
Yeah, I hope this helps.
Great examples there. I think they all make a lot of sense. I would be interested if we jump back again to the end then of the audit. Now you're going through your audit list, you have probably a big long list of things that they need to check or fix in their tracking. How would you then advise a company to implement this? Do you have any kind of priority list for them to make sure they are going through certain things first? Because it can be quite overwhelming once you have so many points that you need to change, right?
Yeah, right. So the one that is always in red is like the PAI. I think these things needs to be fixed first, like PAI. Then in terms of like what is very important, I think that the findings where your data quality is really hurt, so the data points that are measured incorrectly, that needs to be fixed first. For example, like a custom dimension is very important, but often it's like bringing in extra insights or extra data in GA. So I would say if your page views are measured incorrectly, you should focus on the page views first, for example, a single page application, before you implement like the custom dimension. So in other words, like start with things that are prohibited, like PAI, then start working on the things that are really needed in terms of data quality, because you take the wrong business decisions as the data is collected in the wrong way. And then start with advancing your data, like with extra things, like custom dimensions are very important, but especially for the smaller companies that start out, make sure that your basic implementation is set up right. So I guide them through the process. I guide them through like fixing these things. And that's a little bit of how I take it away. And it depends also on the capacity of a company. If it's a larger company, they can probably manage like a larger part in one time. And also one side step, as I work a lot for e-commerce businesses. For e-commerce businesses, I always say like start with the transaction and also the checkout steps. That's like the end of the funnel. Start with getting that implemented correctly. So cut it in 2 or 3 phases. For example, the product impressions, more at the start, promotions, etc. This is something you should look at a little bit later because it's really, as you mentioned, overwhelming to do everything in one time. So enhanced e-commerce, as a good example, as many people listening might implement that or might be wanting to implement it after the call, is that do it like not in one time. And in the audit itself, I have always like a column where I say, okay, this is urgent, this needs to be fixed. This is less urgent. We can look into that later. And most of the time, like roughly 30% of the findings are like some things that needs to be fixed very quickly, and then we look into the other 30% and the other 40% later. But once again, it's also about the company that we are dealing with, like how quickly they can solve things.
Yeah, that's great insights. I think always that priority is very important when it comes to analytics, just so we guide our customers or our clients to the outcome that they want to achieve with their data, which is some kind of change in the organization or on the website. So now let's look a little bit into, I guess the elephant in the room for Google Analytics folks is App plus Web and the future of it, because you have built some great knowledge on this tool, which is mainly based on this old version of Google Analytics, and there will be a new version coming along. So how do you see your audits or the future of Google Analytics changing once we make that big step to App plus Web?
Yeah, great question. I think it will definitely take a while before, let's say, all companies are using App and Web. Probably before all companies are using it, it will be like 10 years from now, because people will keep on doing like legacy stuff like as they are used to do now. I think like there are a lot of changes, of course, as you mentioned, like App and Web, it's an open data model. So it's really like you can go in all directions. A lot of things are changing also in terms of like cookies, server-side tracking in the future, just to mention one thing. But I think from like the core of what we are doing with audits, that will always be like important in terms of data quality measurement, no matter like how the measurements are fetched, also like what is the data model that is behind it. Data quality needs to be monitored. And of course, also I need to educate myself a lot like in this, let's say, new area of GA, because the tool and how it works is changing. But the basic things will stay the same. Like the audit will always be important. There will be ways at the moment, like for example, there is no public reporting API yet. So it's quite difficult to automatically track certain settings, track certain setups of the App and Web property. Also, companies have a lot of freedom while working with it, how to implement it, as it's a completely like event-based model. So there will be changes like in what settings to monitor, what data to monitor, and what way. But basically, you will always have like a company has business objectives. Are they measuring the things in the right way that they need to measure to take a step forward with their business? And this will stay the same. Like, I mean, the way of what you are auditing and the data that's coming in, that might change a bit. But the thing that's below that, where you start, like the audit business objectives, will always be important to keep on monitoring and to keep on taking decisions on, and to change setting, to implement other events. And a lot of companies will be struggling because, as you mentioned, it's totally new. What we are used to, like custom dimensions, custom metrics, the way that events are tracked, it's all going to change. Like from one side, you could say it will be a simplified way, like an event-based model. You only have like events and user properties, for example. But on the other hand, companies really need to make decisions on how to transform their current setup into the new one. So for me, like as someone supporting those companies and bringing out like educational material around it, it will be a lot around like migrating the current setup that is different with custom dimension, custom metrics, and events into like a new data model. So it will be a lot about business requirements and things in addition to doing the audit.
Yeah, I think I agree that with the new open data model of events, we probably need to be more conscious of how data enters our account so it stays meaningful. What do you think about there is this enhanced measurement where Google Analytics App plus Web now tracks for you scrolls and button clicks and so on. So you will actually have more data in your account. Do you find this useful, or are you a fan of auto tracking in that sense?
Well, it depends. Actually, I wrote a blog post about enhanced measurement, I think a few weeks ago, to mention, like, I really think that people should be careful before clicking, like, let's automate it, because you only need to automate the good stuff. And as you mentioned, like, I think, for example, downloads, outbound links can be very useful to track, and almost any company should do it because it's useful information to track. But scroll tracking, like basically scroll tracking on your entire website will cause like many hits to be sent to Google Analytics. And if there's like a hit limit, you have to run a large website and you're measuring every page like in terms of how far do people scroll, you'll end up with so many hits that are probably not going to be useful to optimize your business. So auto tracking can be useful, but only if you carefully think about what you will track automatically. And also, as I mentioned before, like all businesses are different. So Google will never be able to completely automate the tracking for any company. It's like some basic things that might be useful for, let's say 90% of the companies that they are able to automate, but they can never automate, for example, the events that you send to Google Analytics. So I think automation is is okay, but also it can be challenging for companies to decide what to automate or what not. It might put you like in a lazy position where you say like, I try to automate as much as possible, but you don't think enough whether the data is going to help you. And the more data that you gather, the more cluttering it can become, and the more difficult it can become also to extract insights when the data is not useful for you. So I've like mixed thoughts about it. Like automation is good, I use it a lot, but I try to use it only for good purposes and only the things that worked out well in the past that we can automate now.
That's true. Okay, great to hear. And what do you think App plus Web brings us this app functionality? So we actually import data from our mobile apps, from our mobile interactions, and with server-side tracking or the cookie controversy, privacy laws, we have less, well, not less data, but less control over how the data actually enters the account, depending on how, and there are more methods actually to enter the account, right? Yeah. Not only the tracking code that we install on our website. How do you see the future of audits when it comes to, for example, server-side tracking, where you cannot really see what's going on in the background?
Yeah, that's from one side, it's challenging. On the other side, like in terms of like, you cannot really see what's going on in the background. That's true. But you can always see where the data comes. Like you will always be able to monitor the data. So I think you need to have more like discussions with the client, like to find out technically what is going on when you cannot monitor it directly. So probably there will be like more communication also during the audit with the tech team to find out also on the technical side what they are doing and to try to find it out like more in the background what's going on. But still, like in the let's say in the front end in Google Analytics, or if you extract the data to other tools, you will have the data coming in. So you'll have data points to monitor in addition to the setup where you work more closely with the client. But you are right. But also, I think in general, you will in the future maybe be able to measure less. We already face that now with like cookie protection and cookie things that we might have to work with like less data. And I think if you have less data, the more important it even becomes to have like good data quality, because you take a decision more based on a sample like of data than that you have like all data still coming through. So
right.
Yeah, so I think there will be more discussions with the dev team, but still like the data, you need to monitor the data that is coming in.
One other, or maybe the last kind of straw here is that Google is obviously very heavily investing into machine learning, AI, if you want to call it as well. It slowly makes its way to Google Analytics as well, right? So they have just recently announced they would crunch your data in App Plus Web, and they bring you two new metrics. I think it's churn probability and probability to buy or something, right?
Yeah.
So here they're taking your data and crunching it somehow. So you wouldn't actually, you have actually control over the input that you give, but the output that comes out is not something that you can change around in that sense, right? So how do you see these new features entering the future of Google Analytics and audits?
Yeah, I think actually the biggest part is focused around the analysis and recommendation. So I think it will be a more heavy impact on the people that work like as a marketer and an analyst, that their work should become a bit easier, because Google will be able like eventually to draw better insights from the data than most people could do themselves. So I think the roles will be a bit different. In terms of the audit, it's more like crunching the data that's already in Google Analytics. So the audit and the setup, I feel like it's before the machine learning takes place, because we are still responsible for sending the right data for the business, so that Google will be able, or a different, let's say, vendor, to use like AI to actually draw these conclusions. You also have these like insights in GA, or where you type in a question and can see the data coming on. So the analyst and marketer will like have also a different role in the future, I believe. In terms of audits, I see it more like in the foreground, and also like one of the things like currently we don't have like a lot of standard reports anymore in GA, like app and web properties. So that is also changing. You now have like the analysis section with padding analysis and a lot of cool stuff that you can do, where the role of the analyst is more like into like advanced analysis, instead of like looking at simple standard acquisition behavior conversion reports as we are used to like in Universal. So the role of the analyst will be more challenging. I'm moving a bit away from the audits, but for the audits itself, I believe like there's a lot that needs to be done before this AI can actually work, and that's where I and a lot of others like in the market can shine in to help companies to set up this infrastructure, so that Google and all tools will be able to actually draw these great insights for you and to help you to actually streamline your app and web implementation. And maybe as a last note, what I wanted to mention is that I think also like a lot of companies that use Google Analytics are like smaller companies, and those will have quite a challenge, I think, with the migration. Because as I mentioned, like the standard reports, we have to see how many of them are coming back. The analysis section is quite challenging to learn, like the new section in GA, previously only available for paid customers. And also we didn't touch upon like the BigQuery integration. There are some limitations currently with app and web in terms of like how many data points you can send with events. In BigQuery, these limitations are not there. But do small companies really have the resources to put this in place, put a structure in place, work with BigQuery? That's a big question mark for me. So I'm a little bit, let's say, curious how Google will serve all the segments with the app and web property in the future, and especially also the smaller companies that don't have large capacity to work with these advanced analysis sections in GA. And then again, like if you don't have, going back to the audits and the setup right, your analysis won't make that much sense, and you probably take the wrong business decisions or not the optimal ones to drive your business forward.
Wow. Okay, that's great insights here. I hope everybody took something from this interview. We definitely learned a lot. Thank you, Paul, for all the insights and your process as well. Let us know, like, if people want to find out more about you, where can they do so?
They can go to onlinemetrics.com or online-metrics.com. I have both domains, happily. There they can read a lot, like they can see all the content that I wrote in the past, like many many blog posts are out there to learn from. So that's a good starting point. Also on Twitter, like at Online Metrics, there you can find me. On LinkedIn, I'm very active, sharing like content, interacting with people. So I'm very happy to connect on LinkedIn as well. You can simply search for Paul Koks and you will find me. And if this presentation and if this interview sounded really good to you, then I very much recommend you to check out also the course that is up and running, as Julian mentioned, like the Google Analytics Audit Mastery course. If you feel like you want to have an even more structured approach to doing these audits and setups and learn from my mistakes in the past as well and how I got to where I am today, then please go there because there you will find like a more structured approach to doing these audits and setups, even for clients or for your own business, and to enhance your data quality to get more accurate and meaningful data for your business going forward. And also during this event and with a limited time after it, I'm offering this course with a 30% discount. You can go to onlinemetrics.com/MeasureSummit, and there you will find all details around this course. And yeah, it would be great to see you there or to interact with you on LinkedIn. So these are the main ways how you can reach me and interact with me. And any questions, just contact me.
Great. Thank you, Paul. This is it with our little session on Google Analytics audits. If you stick around, we'll have another session afterwards. So yeah, see you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.